Coming up next on Tech News Today, Iain Thomson from The Register joins me to talk about a few awesome stories, including Uber halting its San Francisco pilot program for its autonomous fleet. Also, Google has wearables in the pipeline. Does anybody want one? Facebook sort of admits it's a media company. Sort of. Everyone wants to be Jason. Voorhees. And Sinbad movies in a parallel universe. All that and more coming up next on Tech News Today.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today, episode 1667, recorded Thursday, December 22nd, 2016. This episode of Tech News Today is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Rocket Mortgage brings the mortgage process into the 21st century with a fast, easy, and completely online process. Check out Rocket Mortgage today at quickenloans.com/TNT. Hello and welcome to Tech News Today. This is the show where we talk about some of the biggest tech news stories with people who are passionate about technology. I'm Jason Howell. Obviously, I have no Megan Maroney sitting next to me. She was smart. She took today and tomorrow off to get ready for Christmas so that she's not stressed out by the time she gets there. That was obviously a really great move. I'm going to have to write that down and put that in my strategy plan book for next year. But joining me today, still working, just like myself, is Iain Thomson from The Register. How's it going, Iain?
Oh, pretty good. How's it going, mate?
Excellent. It's going fantastic. I'm getting ready. I'm getting ready for that week. That week off.
It's the week of no alarm calls and not having to continually be watching the news for something break. It was just, we had a Christmas party last week, and then I just signed off, and it's just like, right, okay, we've signed off. It's lunchtime. Let's go and have our lunch. And then thinking, no, as long as there's no news, we'll be fine. And thank you, Yahoo. Thank you very much.
Oh, man.
Email sack breaking just as we were sitting down for the main course.
No big deal. Just another billion.
Yeah, I know. Well, we handed it off to our Australian office. They picked it up.
All right, good.
There was a certain amount of cursing going on around the table.
Yeah, exactly. As they say, news never stops. Certainly doesn't always stop when you're going to your holiday party. That's what they say, that whole thing. So we've got some stories to talk about, and I have a feeling Ian's going to have some awesome opinions on some of these. We'll start off with Uber. Uber announced, and we've been talking about this for the last week now. Well, they've announced that they are going to halt the San Francisco pilot program for its self-driving vehicles after meeting with the DMV after revoking Uber's registration for 16 of its autonomous vehicles. The DMV says it offered Uber the opportunity to complete its permit process, but Uber instead chose to redeploy its vehicles elsewhere. They're taking their toys and they're going to go somewhere else, apparently. But although they did reiterate they are 100% committed to California, I have a feeling it's less than 100%. 100% would be let's do what we need to do and to stay here. So I'm thinking more like 85%. I don't know. What do you think?
I think they wanted to play fast and loose with the rules as they have throughout much of their business careers,
yeah.
And they just decided, well, if we carry on doing it, then the government will give up on this, and state government didn't, and said, listen, either you fill out the proper permits like everybody else is doing, or we're taking your cars off the road. And I think they showed some steel in that meeting, and Uber quite wisely backed down. And I don't understand this sort of why they're unwilling to sign off on the permit, to get the permits for the cars in the first place. I think it's just basically at this point they're trying to push as fast as possible with this autonomous car program. And so they'll go where they can get the most mileage done as quickly as possible.
Yeah, which probably be Michigan, because Michigan has really opened up things. Wouldn't be surprised if suddenly Uber gets super friendly with Michigan going forward. Yeah, I mean, why? What makes California's kind of regulations so much more challenging than elsewhere in this regard?
They're not particularly more challenging. California was the first state legislature to seriously consider this. Although I believe Nevada actually beat them to the punch when it came to allowing autonomous vehicles. But Californians are notoriously risk-averse. They don't like the idea of autonomous vehicles wandering around on the roads without proper supervision. On the other hand, California is the plum market. It's where most of the research has been done, or most of the mileage, has been done with self-driving cars, thanks to Google. And it's basically, if you want to break in, obviously Uber want to break into their autonomous cars into their home market as soon as possible because they're based in the Bay Area. Basically, the company is now desperate to get autonomous cars on the road because it seems to be the only way that Uber can be made profitable. And if the reports this week are to be believed, the company is hemorrhaging cash at an ever-increasing rate.
Absolutely, yeah. We talked all about that yesterday, so it really seems like what Uber is trying to do is push through to get to its autonomous vehicle future, which is where it can cast away those pesky money-grubbing drivers that stock its fleet right now and suddenly become very profitable.
Oh, those drivers with their selfish needs for food and housing and clothing their children. God, it makes me sick. But I mean, seriously, Uber's entire business model is predicated, really, it seems, on autonomous vehicles. And once reliable autonomous vehicles come in, it will be fantastically profitable. The question is, can they get them on the roads before the company runs out of cash? And although it does have a large cash pile, looking at the rate it's burning through it, they're going to have to move very quickly because I don't think state governments or even the federal government is going to be particularly quick to move on autonomous vehicles. The consequences that we saw from the White House report this week on jobs are going to be fairly severe. They don't like the idea of autonomous vehicles causing crashes and saying, oh, no, the technology's fine, and then the first person that gets killed, both the government and Uber will get crucified for it. So, I mean, it's going to take, I would think, at least probably a couple of years before they're legally allowed on roads. Mm-hmm. And even then, they're going to have a driver sitting behind the wheel ready to take over. So I don't think this is happening anywhere near as fast as Uber would like it to, but it's clearly central to their entire business proposition.
And this ends up being just a way of saying, look, we in our pursuit of success, there is no room for speed bumps like these pesky regulations and permits. And that's
and I mean, it's an attitude you see increasingly commonly in Silicon Valley.
For sure.
And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I mean, in this case, I think the DMV, well, anybody who's gone to get a driver's license knows you do not muck about with the DMV because they are very serious about keeping hold of their patch. But I mean, I do think there is a case for regulation of enterprise in this way. I mean, we had that horrific case last year where somebody was trying a startup to auction off parking spaces in San Francisco. And their argument was, well, we're not actually auctioning them off. We're just letting people know where they were. And a judge, the city took them to court, and a judge very rightly said, that's like a prostitute saying she's not actually selling you sex. She's just telling you where you could get some for money. It's an entirely tautological argument.
For sure. Shifting gears, entirely. Google confirmed that it plans to launch 2 new flagship wearable devices early next year, confirming leaks from a few months ago. Android Wear 2.0 is slated to launch in the first quarter of 2017, and Google plans to launch the revised OS with the new lineup of watches that will not, in fact, feature Pixel branding. Instead, those watches will be OEM branded. After a collaboration with Google that kind of sounds like what it's done in the past with Nexus devices. Of course, Nexus is not a thing anymore, but it sounds, if I had to guess, because they say that this is going to be an OEM, like they haven't said which OEM it's going to be, but it's an OEM that has produced Wear watches in the past. If I had to guess, I would say it's probably going to be something like Huawei. Huawei wanted to get in on the next wave of Pixel devices, but was turned off by the fact that Google didn't want OEM branding on there. But Huawei did say that they're still working with Google, so I would guess that's probably what we're going to see here.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking Motorola is a possibility as well. Samsung have come the closest to Apple to making this market sort of fairly widespread. But Samsung watches are usually tied into their phones, which goes against what Google's after.
Yeah.
I was surprised they weren't branding these as Pixels and doing them like an Apple iWatch. But to be quite frank, I'm surprised people are still wearing these damn things because they're just, at the moment with the current state of technology that we have in smartwatches, I'm struggling to see a point for them. They have to be recharged every day. You've got to have your phone nearby. And yes, that's not going to be as much of an issue with Android 2, but it's still going to be a major issue for useful things. So, I mean, it's one of these things, everyone's trying to make the market for this. And all the research I've been seeing in the last 6 months is that there just really isn't that much of a market for people to wear these smartwatches.
Yeah, I'm wondering, and actually this report we'll talk about next kind of touches on this, but I'm wondering if it's maybe what they're starting to realize is that the market, it's not worth actively pursuing making this the next big thing, but realizing that there is some sort of a market there to cater to, so providing something but not making it a major focus. But a new eMarketer report is here to douse all of that, awesome news about new wearables with some cold water. The report says that the wearables market grew only 25% this year, a sign that smartwatches have, in fact, failed to impress consumers, even in light of Apple's claims that the Apple Watch is doing great. They estimate 39.5 million U.S. adults will use wearables once per month. That's down from its previous estimate of 63.7 million back in October 2015. So, I mean, obviously the big driver in this space seems to be, where it's settled, is really just the fitness trackers, the devices that actually have an explicit goal, an explicit reason for use that goes beyond just like notification triage.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. And this ties in with some interesting research last week from Gartner that was saying that 31% of wearables owners stop wearing them within a year.
Yeah.
Either they get bored with them or they break and they don't bother to replace them. Now, that's a fairly hefty churn rate.
Yeah, it is.
And, I don't see how... I think this is kind of like having a tablet by your mouse pad on your PC, like a little Wacom drawing tablet or something. It's very popular for a very small percentage of computer users. But in the mass market, it's not a big thing. And I think at the moment, smartwatches are heading towards that kind of niche territory. Mm-hmm. Now, if they can get much better battery life and a SIM card in the actual watch, so you don't need to carry your phone everywhere, then you could have a really, really interesting product. But based on the current standard of the technology, it seems people are getting bored with these things. They're kind of expensive. You've still got to carry your phone around with them. Why bother? Let's go and spend $300-$400 on something else.
Yeah, that really does seem to be the case. Iain, you wrote about Microsoft's contract with the U.S. Department of Defense. Tell us about the deal that was originally reported yesterday, right? Yeah.
This was the DoD every few days puts out reports on contract wins, and there was a very large figure, $927 million over 5 years, for Microsoft to provide Blue Badge support. Now, Blue Badge means that the people doing the support will be Microsoft execs themselves or Microsoft staff themselves, rather than third-party contractors who typically wear orange badges when they're on campus. Now, the initial announcement did say that it would give the military access rights to Microsoft's proprietary closed source code. Now, when that went up, I got an email very early this morning, as in darkness, wee small hours of this morning, from the DoD saying, in fact, they'd misspoken on that one. They're not going to be getting access to Microsoft support code, which is going to reassure an awful lot of people, because I don't think anybody was particularly wild about the thought of the DoD saying it needed to have a look at that to do its mission. But what they are getting for nearly $1 billion is pretty much the top flight tech support that you can get, because when Microsoft themselves are doing it, and when the client is A, the Department of Defense, and B, one of their biggest support contracts in history, then they're going to be pulling out all the stops to make sure the boys and girls in green are fully supported on their networks.
I have to imagine it would have been pretty crazy if Microsoft was in fact opening up their source code in that way. So I guess that kind of makes sense. Microsoft really is very hesitant to do that.
I know. I mean, I checked the report because I wrote the story yesterday and going through the report, and they did explicitly state that. And I was just writing this thinking, well, hang on a second. Microsoft's already in massive dispute with the Chinese government because they want access to the source code before they'll allow Microsoft to sell to critical infrastructure companies. Why are they suddenly handing it over now? And it's like, well, 927 million is a lot, but it's not an overwhelming amount. I mean, I'm pretty sure Steve Ballmer could find that and down the back of his sofa if he looked hard enough. But I mean, so it's a big contract, but it's nice that they've actually come out and said this is not what we're after.
Right.
I suspect it was just like they wanted the ability to adapt the code to suit their own purposes, and somebody just didn't understand that in the DoD press office and put the release out. But it did need clarification, because that would have been a very worrying step. If you can buy access to Microsoft source code, then I think that puts a lot of people at risk, because when you do find 0 days in that thing, then they tend to get out. People will talk to a friend talks to a friend, whatever. And then you've got serious security problems coming down the line later on.
Yeah, I mean, there's the same kind of argument around the Apple encryption, story that happened earlier this year. Whereas if it actually exists, then that is an open door, that is an open vector that can be enjoyed by all who wish to manipulate that in whatever way they will.
In the court filings for that case, the government was like, no, we can keep it absolutely quiet. That's fine. It's just like, hang on. You're the same guys behind the Office of Personnel Management who managed to lose the security files of everybody in the US government from the last 5 years, and you're asking us to trust you on this one. Maybe not.
We think about that one. To be a media company or to be a not media company? That is the question often asked of Facebook in this era of news, fake or not. CEO Mark Zuckerberg has repeatedly stated that Facebook sits in the not category, but the more it gets in there and tweaks the news that it shows versus the news that it obscures, it becomes more and more like a media company, whether it wants to admit it or not. Apparently, they're beginning to accept reality, at least partially. Mark Zuckerberg and COO Sheryl Sandberg held a live video year-end sit-down looking back at the massive year. And during the chat, Zuckerberg said it's not a traditional media company. He says, we build technology and we feel responsible for how it's used. Traditional media company is better than what he's said up until now, which is that we are not. What is why does this distinction matter, Iain? Because I feel like we hear this time and time again, and I feel like it's important, but explain a little bit like why that distinction matters.
Honestly, it's weasel words on his part. I mean, I was at a press conference a couple of years ago where he said explicitly, we want to be the world's newspaper. And I can remember thinking at the time, it's like, right, well, you better have some good editors in place if you do that. What we're seeing now is some frantic backpedaling because Facebook took a big PR hit during and after the election at the amount of complete rubbish that was being put up on the site and shared. And the fact is, I think surveys have shown that a good half of all Facebook users, it's their primary source for the news. And if you've got that kind of thing and you've got that kind of influence over people, then you have a responsibility to get it right. I mean, we at the Reg, we love putting up sort of off the wall stories and that sort of thing, but we have to be absolutely sure that everything we put down is accurate because we're liable if it isn't. And what Facebook seems to be saying is, yes, we want to be the world's newspaper, but we don't want to bear any of the responsibility or the liability for that or any of the costs of making sure that what we're actually putting out is actually accurate. So they've painted themselves into a bit of a corner here, and you're going to see a sustained PR push for the next few months until people calm down a bit to try and convince people, oh, we're a non-traditional company, therefore it's really not our responsibility, but we'll do what we can. And the stuff they've got at the moment is having other people pay to check their news for them, which I'm sure is great from Facebook's perspective, but it doesn't really inspire me with confidence in the level of responsibility they're willing to take for their platform.
Yeah, it's something, but it's not committing to that next level, which who knows if or when we'll see that. Really seems like Facebook's trying to strike a convenient balance between the two. I feel comforted at least that it's partially there as far as what Zuckerberg is saying, because he's definitely changed his tune at least a little bit. Although if it's just semantics, then who cares? But
I mean, when this all kicked off, they were just like, well, obviously we don't have any real responsibility for what people put on the site, we're pretty sure fake news wouldn't have influenced anybody. And then they turn around to advertise and say, look, we've got influence here, and people's ideas. You can't have it both ways. Mm-hmm. It's like either you're selling something or you're not. And in this case, I mean, they're coming round slowly but surely. But from what I've seen of Facebook's attitude in the last couple of months, they're going to try and weasel the way out of this one. And it's going to come back and hurt them because the company has had a terrible year PR-wise. And that's only going to continue unless they take firm steps.
PR-wise, maybe they've had a terrible year, but man, their user growth still is rock solid. And they're coining in the money. Yeah.
I mean, they're making billions every quarter, and for them to turn around and say, well, we can't do anything about this. It's just like, really, you couldn't hire some skilled people to actually go and do this? It's like, they had those, they got rid of them, and then they put this algorithm in, which was even worse than that. It was just, it's been a complete nightmare. It's it's almost coming back to the Uber example from earlier in the show. It's just like, let's push it out there. Let's make sure that software can do all this. We'll take humans out of the equation, and disaster. Because computers are incredibly smart about some things, but they're incredibly dumb about a number of other things as well.
Yeah, and there's the aspect that even an algorithm was created by a human. So if you feel like you're actually taking a human out of the process, you're only taking it out of a part of the process. That doesn't negate the fact that a human still made these decisions, and that in turn could be interpreted as, you know, the kind of efforts of, let's say, a media company that decides what content rules and what content is obscured.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to be hosting content of that nature, you've got to be liable for it. And that's what Facebook is desperately trying to avoid, is liability.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, we'll see how it develops. This is going to be something which is going to take them months, if not years, to sort out.
Yep. And finally, Canada's telecom regulator declared that high-speed internet is, in fact, a basic service, and as such, all Canadian citizens are entitled to broadband internet services. Telecom providers are on the hook to help provide $750 million in infrastructure build-out costs to hopefully reach rural and remote areas, so everybody gets it. Speed mandates are set at 50 megabits per second down and 10 megabits per second up. That's 10 times faster than current targets. I thought that was actually pretty reasonable, considering what it could have been. It also requires access to unlimited data, requires wireless technology to cover major roads and as well support people with disabilities. They have to do that within 6 months. What do you think about this?
I think it's potentially a very good move. I mean, you've got to remember the US government gave telcos here an awful lot of money about a decade ago to build out an internet backbone, and somehow that fell by the wayside and they kept the cash. Setting a 50 megabit per second download minimum, I thought was a very brave move. I mean, when you consider the geographical constraints of Canada, I mean, yes, you've got 90% of the population within a couple of 100 miles of the US border, but then you've got vast distances with very low population densities, and it's getting those people online that's going to be really, really expensive. But I think, hey, 50 megabyte service is really what you should be using these days.
Yeah.
And it kind of shows up the parlor state of US broadband when our Canadian cousins are beating us hollow on that one. But also very important, unlimited data caps on fixed line. That's really, really important, because there really is no network congestion argument to be had for data caps. They're purely a revenue raising device.
Sure.
And you need someone to step in and say, right, enough is enough. Unless you're providing over this base level service, then you really can't be gouging people in the way that some companies have been.
Yeah, and they've actually been pretty aggressive with the deadline for the build out. They've set that at 5 years, and they say, we realize this is going to be a challenge, but it's super important. Everyone deserves. I mean, they're basically taking the step to say that internet access is that's exactly what they're saying. It's a basic right. It's almost like a human right at this point. It's you are significantly behind the ball if you do not have access based on where you live to internet access. And I think there are a lot of other places that could really learn a good lesson from this.
I'm looking out of my window right now. Yes.
There we go.
It does put people at a significant disadvantage, and there's a reason why governments like South Korea or Finland or various others spent massively early on to get fiber networks around the country, rather than in the US and UK to an extent relying on companies to take the country's best interests at heart and then getting disappointed fairly rapidly.
Yeah.
So I think it's a brave goal. I think it's a good goal, and I think it should be carried on. And if they actually do manage to do it within the 5-year deadline, then they could teach us a few lessons.
Yes, please do. Teach us many lessons. We will listen, and some of us. Up next, Sam Miskovich from Ars Technica is going to join us to tell us whether the new Assassin's Creed movie is worth our time. Definitely stick around for that. But first, let's take a minute to thank Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. They are the sponsor of this episode, and this is perfect if you want to buy a house or you want to refinance the house you already have, but you're put off by the fact that it comes with all of these extra things that you have to do. Pulling information from all over the place is not the easiest work in the world, and it's certainly no fun. So we're always looking for ways to make that kind of stuff a little bit easier, and that's what Rocket Mortgage is all about. Rocket Mortgage brings the mortgage approval process into the 21st century. It's fast, powerful, and completely online. Rocket Mortgage has taken all the complicated, time-consuming parts of applying for a mortgage out of the equation to make it more simple for you. So if you hate searching through stacks of old files, paperwork, digging up that information, don't know where it is, all those challenges, with Rocket Mortgage, you can easily share your bank statements, your pay stubs, all that stuff at the touch of a button. It's going to help you get approved in minutes for a custom mortgage solution that's been tailored to your unique financial situation. And even better, with Rocket Mortgage, you can do all of this with something you already have, your phone or your tablet, the technology you already own. It's a quick online process that you can manage from the convenience of your couch. So if you're looking to refinance your mortgage or buy a home, check out Rocket Mortgage today at quickenloans.com/TNT. That's quickenloans.com/TNT. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLS consumeraccess.org, number 3030. And we thank Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans for their support. Super Mario Run is either a big hit or a big disappointment. I honestly can't quite tell based on all of the conflicted stories I've read since it launched last week. I enjoyed it. But the storied franchise seems to have overstayed its helpless princess trope. Joining us to talk about this is Sam Miskovich from Ars Technica. How's it going, Sam?
Hey, guys. I got everybody some licorice cookies for the holidays.
Licorice cookies?
Sweet.
Or anise. I don't know how to say words.
Anise. Yes, anise. Yeah, you're right. I never know how to.
I just tell Google lady, spell it ANISE, and then it gets texted in my thank you note.
But are they any good?
Oh, they're so good. They're from my mother. Would you like some? I'll bring them over in a minute.
Excellent. Cool. Bring those over just as soon as we're done. So what's changed in the 30 plus years since Mario first hit the scene?
Oh, the rest of the world.
Oh, okay.
There was a really great piece today. I want to say New York Times. Am I mistaken? I'm sorry. I've just been dealing with. There was a really great piece in the New York Times today that pointed out something that I think a lot of the gaming world tends to just brush over and not consider, which is that Super Mario Run is launching for a lot of people who aren't used to the princess trope, who don't necessarily just use that by a default. They don't talk about video games in that sort of language that people who've played Mario all their lives and pick up new copies might tend to do. Now, Princess Peach has been the star of one game, which is the one that starred her with a whole bunch of emotions. She's also been you had to use her emotions as powers. It was really offensive and awful. It was called Super Princess Peach.
I never
Nintendo
heard
doesn't
of that
really. Yeah, Nintendo doesn't talk about it very much. There's also entries in which she is a character you can control, that you can jump and float and do all that stuff. Super Mario 2 for the NES did that. Mm-hmm. And there's the more recent Super Mario 3D World for the Wii U that let you play as her as well. Those are great. It's nice to see her just appear. She's also appeared in the tennis games, the Mario Kart games, a lot of these accessory franchises as a playable character. But in Super Mario Run, Mario is it. And that was an issue for that New York Times author. I don't know. What did you think of the piece?
Well, I mean, I think it points out. I think what you say at the very beginning of this is very true. The world has changed a lot. At the same time, people who are fans of this franchise, let's say, are very precious about these things. And so something like that, I mean, obviously, something like that is not top of mind, nor is it something that I think ever kind of is a consideration, because it's just the way it is. Like it's not looked into beyond just that. It's just a story arc, let's say.
Absolutely. Let's consider the origins. First off, Donkey Kong began as a total ripoff of King Kong, led to a giant lawsuit with Universal, which ultimately Nintendo won out on. Mm-hmm. But that began with Pauline as this helpless blonde maiden that was carried up a giant building by an ape. And then Mario followed that up with Super Mario, in which he just needed to run to the right to save a princess. And Super Mario Run is all about running to the right and only the right. It automatically runs you, which some people have criticized in terms of changing the expected gameplay of a Mario franchise. But the thing that hasn't changed is that there's a princess at the end. She bakes you a cake to start, and then she disappears, and there's just no other playable female character that you can have. You don't really get to use Toadette, who's another option. It's just a very easy opportunity with Super Mario Run to add female characters in a really organic way, just because we're all hanging out in the Mushroom Kingdom. Other Mario games have had women in them in a very simple, not big whoop kind of way. And I know that author, the point he had was he wants to hand this to his daughter and say, hey, the world is the kind where you can play as a female character. You can identify with that character. It's not that hard to do to make everybody feel a little more represented. Because if it's not going to be all fake make-believe species and creatures, if it's not all Yoshis, and if we're going to have a man, then put a woman in there. It's stupid. Either do them both or do neither. That's my vote.
Do them both.
It does make sense. I mean, given we are living in sort of the 2010s now, you would have thought they could have put a female character in there. Particularly as my understanding, and you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, Sam, but the majority of gamers are now women. Is that correct?
Yes. There's been different metrics counting this out, but I think even at the very least, it's neck and neck, and it's sort of silly to think of women as a quote unquote minority. That is not the case when it comes to real gaming, and we're not just talking about this stupid debate that some quote unquote gamers will make about it being women only play certain types of games. I'm sorry. Women who join the interactive medium of gaming matter no matter what they're playing, just in the same way that guys who play games that I think are stupid matter in the sphere of gaming.
Sure. Now, all right, so I've spent a lifetime kind of moving on into a very different direction here. I've spent a lifetime in the shadows of Jason Voorhees. And as a horror movie buff, I have a special place in my heart for Friday the 13th. You're playing this new game, this Friday the 13th game. I hadn't even heard of it, but then when I checked out some of the footage, although I had a hard time finding actual gameplay footage, but it looks really cool. Tell us about it.
It is starting to come out of the woodwork. This game has been in the works for a little while, totally under wraps. People have not been talking about it because it hasn't been ready to show off. But out of the blue, a bunch of beta keys went out to different people. A lot of YouTube streamers and Twitch streamers are being handed keys. The guys who are making this, it's a couple of groups. One is called Gun Inc. It's like 3 small development houses all kind of working together on this. But they've gotten the film license. They've gotten the right to Jason Voorhees. They've gotten the rights to the original music, to the original camp and lake location kind of design. And the whole thing is an online competition game where it's one super powered person as Jason versus 7 to 8 wimpy camp counselors. And so you're playing online. You have a headset on and you're running around in this sort of third-person action thing. You've seen a lot of this in games. Your Tomb Raiders, Gears of War, all that stuff where you're sort of running around in 3D third person. In this case, it's kind of like the game Left 4 Dead, but where that game was just 4 people against a bunch of brainless computer zombies, this is 7 people against one lucky real-life player who gets to take on Jason. Jason is way more powerful than the 7 counselors. That sort of makes sense, if you're doing 1-on-7. And Jason has these sort of abilities that recharge, that make him larger than life and terrifying. He's got the ability to warp around, so he'll just appear out of nowhere. It's like, that's sort of how he works in the films. He's also got he's just strong. He can break through doors. He can do all this sort of stuff as the counselors try to come up with ways to either escape the camp or kill Jason. And killing Jason is a lot harder. He takes a lot of pain. He will kill at least a few counselors while you try to kill him. And killing people gives him more power, and it scares the other counselors. Fear is totally a resource. There are little meters according to the fear that is generated and the fear that is petered out. So the counselors are working together to bring down fear, to come up with alternate ways to escape the campsite. And Jason is trying to scare the crap out of him, both with little things that affect the meter, but also just doing stuff that makes stuff flash and lights go out and things that will literally scare the players. I think it's genius. It's a beta. So the fact that you haven't found footage is probably good because there's lots of bugs. I've had a lot of the game crash because it's not done. It's a free test. They really want this out. They want people talking about it while they fine tune it. The basic concept is solid. Whether they get the whole online system working to be as scary as it sounds is the other question. But I'm hopeful. I think it's a really cool move in the scary game genre. The Friday the 13th has only had crappy video games. I remember some from the NES days. So a good one, I'm all for it.
That's what I was going to mention. There were some Friday the 13th games. They were not very good. And this was done through Kickstarter, right? This was all funded through Kickstarter, or at least
kicked off. When you see the word Kickstarter on a thing these days, it just means that publishers come in. There's a lot of this now where publishers will come in and say, if you get X amount of dollars on Kickstarter, we will pay for the rest and put it out. So I can't say for sure, but yeah, started as a Kickstarter lark. I have a filter in my email that actually sends things with the word Kickstarter to them directly into my spam. Mm-hmm. So it takes something like this that's actually playable. Once the thing is in the wild, it really exists. It's a real prototype. That's where I'm like, all right, great. So I'm happy to see something out, and I'm happy to see. Maybe we'll get some more other horror games. Maybe we'll get The Ring as an online video game, or a really crappy Nightmare on Elm Street. I don't know. Just bring it on. The 80s. Here's the thing I think would be awesome is that you now have powerful enough home computers and game systems to recreate the crappy special effects from 80s movies.
True.
So you can make it look like crappy practical effects. So that's sort of what my dream is in the next few years of computer games. So bring it on. I hope this does well.
I've got to ask, though. I mean, the original Friday the 13th film was 1980. 36 years down the line, is it still that? Is this a name that the kids will recognize?
It doesn't matter whether they recognize it or not. There's a dude killing a bunch of teenagers wearing barely any clothing. That's a timeless premise, if there ever was one, in my opinion. That's really, I think that's what you and you're going to get people who know the franchise who are shouting about it. Yeah. And it's about blood and teenagers. You know, that'll work. You know, Scream did a really good job of capturing the basics of Friday the 13th when that blew up. And so, you know, it's just carrying that sort of torch.
Man, I was afraid there for a second. I was like, oh no, this B-roll that I found is about to get really dark.
No, the murder parts, you get extra points if you kill a counselor brutally because it leaves you exposed. So if you do a really nasty kill, not only it increases fear for everyone. I'm telling you, man, they really thought this through.
Yeah, as a horror movie fan and fan of the franchise, at least some of the movies anyways, this sounds kind of like a dream come true, really. Next step would be VR, a faithful VR version of this. Finally, video game movies are a tricky thing. That's been my experience anyways. Tell us, Assassin's Creed, is it worth anyone's time?
So instead of a scary movie, what we have is a garbage movie. The Assassin's Creed movie is possibly the worst movie I've seen all year. And I did see Independence Day Research, whatever the heck they called that one. And that was awful. I'm actually still like having nightmares where both of those movies battle it out for worst movie of the year awards. It's a shame because I like Michael Fassbender a lot. And you can see him just like I said in the review, he's like chained to a rusty old hot furnace of terrible dialogue. It's like a really thin script. There's really no character development. The idea of these Assassin's Creed games actually got me excited. I had hopes that this could be sort of a Quantum Leap or Doctor Who style thing. The games work where you have a modern day man with a checkered past warping back in time to tap into his ancestors' roots and commit crazy assassinations and murders and intrigue sort of things. And I'm like, that'd be great. You could have, you know, one movie he's off in the American Revolution, the next he's off in the Renaissance, and sort of jumping around and doing crazy assassinations with wacky historical cameos every time. So I thought, all right, awesome. We could develop Michael Fassbender, who's a great actor, and have some wacky stuff happen around him, and then, you know, have a great sequel. It seems like it's a hard thing to mess up, but man, they mess it up. Jeremy Irons is awful. There's a woman who, oh goodness, I'm looking up the name. I'm so sorry. Marion Cotillard, I cannot pronounce her name, but Marion, oh my God, such a great actress who's also chained to terrible dialogue. None of it makes sense. The whole thing becomes like a crappy 1990s Ninja Turtles movie near the end with just this bizarre fight where all the guards are screaming nonsensically while they all attack the assassin one at a time. It's just like everything that you would expect from, and I enjoy shouting about it because I want people to not go, because it's not even fun to make fun of. Whereas, you know, Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad, those were like so bad they're almost good kind of movies. This was just slow, obnoxious, annoying, bad, disappointing. It's not just that it's a bad video game movie. It just wastes all of the possible potential and leaves us with just some dreck that I think has just been designed to just move tickets in non-English speaking countries where you can just put subtitles on this and have some beautiful shots and just hope the money comes rolling in. I hope it doesn't.
Yeah, and a lot of action. So then, how about this question? This goes for everyone. There have been a lot of video game films, both films about actual video games and films that kind of highlight a video game, and then, you know, in many cases they go on and become video games themselves. Iain, are you a fan of the genre? Do you have any like favorite video game movies?
Well, you see, I mean, I was scarred early because you know, when I was a kid, Tron came out, and that just blew me away completely.
Oh yeah,
and
completely.
Then they made the Tron video games around it.
Yep.
And loved playing those. But then we had Super Mario Brothers and Bob Hoskins, who I've since found out afterwards was so disappointed with the film. he turned up on set drunk most days, and you can tell it because it's a really bad film. And there hasn't been, to my mind, a good film of a video game ever made since that point. I mean, you could argue about some, but generally they're all pretty dire. And it gets even worse if you get a film like Phantom Menace, where they stuck the pod race in there, almost, it seems, just so they could build a video game and sell it around afterwards.
To be fair, that pod racing video game was amazing in arcades. I don't know if you've ever strapped into it. It was all big and clunky, and there's no way this is going to make money, but I loved it.
Oh, okay, fair enough. But yeah, as far as a fan of video game movies, no. Whenever I see the film of the game, and you're just like, you know what? I think I'd almost rather go and watch a Richard Curtis film rather than deal with that. You know, and that's saying something. You know.
What do you think, Sam?
Well, I like to say that video games have just jumped over movies, to be quite honest. I think that there are video games that sell cinematic elements. I mean, Uncharted and The Last of Us are such easy titles to talk about. In some ways, I think they're not necessarily great games because you end up just watching the action play out in this predetermined way, but it's just interactive enough that it's a good time. Watch Dogs 2, I found, was actually, I think, more entertaining as an interactive film than it was as a game. There's a game called Inside that came out this year. That's a really weird indie title that sort of does this amazing stuff with interactivity. Basically, that one is so confusing and nonsensical. I would hate it as a movie or a cartoon, but when I was controlling it, the mystery worked. So I think that's sort of where I lean is go, okay, well, video game-based movies are bad, but video games that try to be movies, they're doing a pretty good job. They're filling that in, and I'm going to kind of go in that direction.
I would completely agree. Uncharted specifically is so cinematic that, what you said about it is spot on. Like, in my opinion, I haven't really seen any movies based on, like, I saw Mortal Kombat. I was a big Mortal Kombat fan, and I saw that movie, and I mean, it was okay. It wasn't like I walked out of that theater, I was like, this is exactly the movie it needed to be. It just was what it was, and it existed. But some of my favorite video game-themed movies, Last Starfighter, Tron, of course, I thought Wreck-It Ralph was actually really good, even though it was, touching on a lot of different points. Burke here posed Wing Commander, which I didn't know that was a movie, and I don't know how good it was.
And there's just so many movies that feel like video games. That's what I felt like The Matrix was. The Matrix was so clearly, the creators were obsessed with digital culture, and they said, let's make it feel like a video game that can't be made yet. All the bullet time stuff that got copied over the next, 12, 15 years. I mean, what more do you need to say? The Wachowskis really had the idea of an interactive video game-ish movie or movie-ish video game, whatever you call it, and that's, Hollywood's picked up on those cues. There's been action movies that feel like crazy video games. I'm cool with that.
Yeah. And I mean, there's hope because for the longest time, more often than not, comic book movies were really bad. And now many would say that that's, one of the most successful kind of genres of movies right now, at least from a money-making standpoint and from a quality standpoint. They are so much better now than they ever used to be. So
what you're saying is you're saying that Paul Rudd will be Dr. Mario in the blockbuster of 2037. I'm into it. I'm ready.
Dr. Mario, the movie. Man, that has to happen now.
But if you want to see a bad comic book film, watch the original Fantastic Four film. It is excretably poor. It's not even funnily bad. It's just...
I think a lot of people would agree.
I'm going to go grab my VHS of Howard the Duck right now and just be in peace. That's where I'm going.
Yeah, but Howard the Duck is so bad it's good. Sam Miskovich, Ars Technica, always a pleasure getting you on. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your thoughts on all these stories and a whole lot more. Really appreciate it.
And my cookies.
Yep, I'll be waiting for those.
Happy holidays to y'all.
You too.
Am I on the air in like 2 days for a thing I recorded weeks ago?
We have some specials that'll appear next week. I believe you're on next Wednesday.
I don't know. I said nothing. Anyway, I will see you all from the past and the future. Happy holidays to you
later,
guys.
Sam.
Have a good one,
Happy
Sam.
holidays. All right, we got some feedback. Bruce wrote into TNT at twit.tv regarding the ongoing saga of how AI is expected to change the world for good and for bad. Bruce writes, although it is most likely the case that AI will cause massive disruption in the economy, yes it is, I think it will be a slow march and not something that happens in the blink of an eye. ATMs have existed for how long? He says over 10 years, and I would say a lot more than 10 years. And yet human tellers and bankers still exist. And those bankers and tellers also had the threat of internet and app banking. Humans tend to adjust slowly to massive technology disruptions. AI will disrupt. However, I think it is much more challenging to really predict how it will disrupt, how quickly, and to what extent. Plus, it is equally difficult to predict how it will create jobs. Someone has to fill the ATM with money. A human needs to perform maintenance on the machine. Humans need to install and remove the machines, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think about our AI replacing our jobs future, Iain?
I think it's going to be happening. Well, certainly the AI people I'm speaking to are saying it's going to be happening sooner rather than later, and politicians really need to pull their finger out and get some kind of a plan to deal with this. Now, I mean, he's perfectly right. ATMs have been around, well, certainly in the UK, since the 1970s. But they kept banks and bank tellers really until the internet banking sort of kicked off about 15 years ago. And then you saw massive shutdowns of banking offices all over the country. I mean, my old bank in London, it used to be a horrible place, but it's lovely. It's a coffee shop now. And, you know, it's a much more pleasant place to visit. But, you know, the fact of the matter is ATMs themselves, because if tellers just weren't handing out money, there was an enormous back office function. It wasn't until the internet came in. And then when that did, the number of banking jobs, certainly in the UK, I can't speak for how it worked over here, but they crashed. Now, the first, I think, AI thing we're going to see is the self-driving car. Yeah. And once you get one of those that doesn't have to have a driver sitting there as backup, then that's about 4 million jobs in this country gone, and no real way to get them back. So people are going to have to either retrain or give up on work altogether. And this kind of thing it's cascading down, and it's not just going to be drivers and McDonald's orderers and that sort of thing. We're talking about lawyers, accountants, pilots, all these people, safe, high middle class jobs, all going out the window. So it's going to be very interesting times ahead. I honestly think it'll take a little while to gain momentum, and then once the systems have proved themselves, it's going to come in a crash. Yeah,
right. Once you see one successful transition, I mean, and especially because at that point, this technology kind of sphere will have progressed equally compared to its each other. A whole lot more by the time this starts to happen. So just that that rapid kind of succession of all of this rollout is going to pick up steam, and yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm ready for it.
Well, I know what you mean. I mean, journalism is also under fire. We've already got sort of automated articles being done, not very good ones, admittedly, but it's that sort of thing is coming, and a lot of businesses really want to see it because it'll cut their costs dramatically. And if there are a few hiccups along the way, then they can deal with that in exchange for longer, sort of more higher profits in the long term.
Yeah. Universal income right around the corner. Universal income incoming.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you remember in the, turn of the century, they had a bot called Ananova, which was an animated newsreader, which died on its backside because the technology wasn't anywhere near there yet. But we're going to be getting to the point now where, give it 10 years time, you could have artificial presenters on Twit. It's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that kind of type of technology that's happening with AI right now quite a few times on this show, where it's very possible for a computer, for an AI to take all of the examples of, let's say, a set here at Twit, and then, however many millions of samples of that, and then create its own, and then also animate the face and make it, man, this is a crazy world we're going into. I know I keep saying that, but I just don't know if I'm ready for it. TNT's fan of the day is Robert S. on Twitter, who sent us this video saying, I try and pretend I live in the future when I listen to my tech news. Let's check that out if it's loading. Oh, yeah, you can hear it.
Okay.
Play tech news today.
Here's the latest news.
See, more and more we're getting these how I watches, and it's yep, people pulling it up. There we are on the Google Home. Pretty easy to do. He turned on his lights before that. That's what you didn't hear, which Google Home makes very easy. Iain, did you end up getting a Google Home? I know you're Android. I know you've got an Android device. Do you have Google Home in your home?
I don't, to be honest. I'm kind of old-fashioned about this one. I turn my lights on and off myself the biological way, and I just hate the idea of having a device in the house listening the entire time.
Yeah.
I know that's a personal failing, but I was horrified to read, I think it was earlier this week or end of last week, one of the hotels in Vegas is going to be putting It isn't Google Home. I think it's the Amazon Echo.
Yes,
in
it's the
all
Echo.
of the hotel rooms. So now what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas, Seattle, Utah, wherever else they've got their data centers. And Lord knows what's going to pop up because you've been to Vegas, you know what it's like there. People party. And I would get very, very nervous about having an Amazon Echo in the corner recording everything. You know?
Yeah, exactly. That's the Wynn Hotel. 4,748 of its hotel rooms are going to have Amazon Echoes.
It would be the very first thing I unplug as soon as I get there. It's just
Probably
I don't want my house. I don't want one listening to my snoring or my sleep talking or whatever. So no.
If it's not plugged in, it can't spy on you.
That's what they tell us.
That's pretty much it, yeah. Show us how you watch or listen to TNT. Just record a video or take a picture of yourself or your setup. Post it on Instagram, Google+, Twitter, or Facebook, and use the hashtag HowIWatchTNT, and we're going to find it. So, have you ever seen the movie called Shazam, starring the comedian Sinbad as a genie who grants wishes to two young children? Or was it a movie called Kazam, starring Shaquille O'Neal, about a genie who helps a boy find his estranged father? According to many people online, and in particular on Reddit, of course, both films existed, yet the one starring Sinbad doesn't actually seem to exist at all. It's like this weird, like, collective thinking from the early 90s that there was, in fact, a movie with a genie starring Sinbad that did exist. And now these people are like, this is like a piece of my childhood that is missing now because anytime I do a search, it exists nowhere online. Sinbad himself has refuted it and said, I think you'd be able to find it if I actually did that. Yet people are like steadfast, just vehemently saying, no, this happened. I specifically remember it from my childhood. Has this sort of thing ever happened to you, Iain?
Actually, I have had discussions like this with my sister, where I remember something vividly and she tells me that it can't possibly have happened and explains why. The human mind is a tremendously tricky thing at the best of times, but this is a fascinating example of how people came to believe they had a memory of something, reinforced it online by talking to other people who also claim to have the same memory, and then it's become a big thing. This is why police officers in particular hate having to rely on eyewitness testimony, because as humans, we're lousy at it. We can make ourselves believe that we've seen things that we haven't. And it's this is a classic example of that.
Yeah, and some of the people who truly believe this are blaming something called the Mandela Effect, where basically there's a glitch in the world thanks to a parallel universe, and that this actually did happen. It's just we're living in parallel universe.
See, I thought we were living in a software simulated universe. So
I think they're related.
A bug in the code in the 90s, and it was just like one developer tool went a little bit hog wild, and then it's just like, okay, right, I remember it now. You know,
they're totally related, Iain, and we are living in a software simulation. I'm convinced of that every single day.
I was kind of hoping the pay was going to be better if we were, because it's like, I've got a yacht I want to buy, for goodness sake.
So someone kick the machine, or maybe pull the cartridge out and blow in it and then put it back in, because something's going wrong.
Yeah, there's a Nintendo player from old, right?
Iain Thomson, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to hang out with me and talk some technology news.
No, it's always fun when I doing this show, and it's. I hope you have a great holiday as well.
Absolutely,
and give my best to Megan as ever.
Of course, although I won't see her. She's already on her holiday. We're chumps because we're still working compared to her. Yeah. Where can people follow your work online?
Easiest way is my Twitter handle at Iain Thomson, but it's a really odd spelling, so it's IAINTHOMSON, and believe me, my parents and I have had words about that. Or you can get me on the register.co.uk.
Excellent. Really appreciate it, and have a great holiday, man. Enjoy your break.
And you too. I shall see you in the new year, mate.
Sounds good. All right, tomorrow's guest is going to be none other than Ron Richards, my friend from All About Android, and regular co-host on this show when Megan's out. TNT records live every Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, 11 p.m. UTC at twit.tv/live. You can be part of the show by emailing us, tnt@twit.tv. Leave us a short voicemail, 260-TNT-SHOW, and find us on Twitter. We are at Tech News Today TV. Of course, if you need to find the show, all the ways to subscribe are on our site. It's twit.tv/TNT. That's really the main thing you need to know. If you want to tweet at me, I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter. Thanks to our technical director, Kara Cole. Thanks to Burke for helping out here in the studio. Thanks to Kevin for editing. And thanks to you for talking tech with us today. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Bye, everybody. Oh, come here. Kara, please, don't leave me hanging, bro. There we go.